Things are growing. You're getting up to hundreds of employees. Something goes down in Bangladesh, and all of a sudden, devices, funding, offline. How did you move through that crisis?
Things really escalated. August 5th is when the government fell and the then prime minister fled the country. Amidst the unrest, as an essential service, people need water, right? We can't just turn off. We are a utility. We are the de facto utility providing safe water through water ATMs in areas where the utility doesn't have piped water. There is a pride that my team has in saying that, no, I am going to work amidst all of this chaos because I know dependent on me is the fact that more than 2 million people in Dhaka are every day going to benefit from this water.
Welcome to How to Help a Few Billion People. In this podcast, we feature entrepreneurs who have incredible purpose and passion to support billions of people, not make billions of dollars. In today's episode, we're going to talk to Minhaj, the co-founder and CEO at Drinkwell. This organization serves up, quote, water beyond the pipe. Now, what do we mean by water beyond the pipe? Well, imagine a government or a private utility. At some point, their pipes that deliver clean water to households ends. Where those pipes end, water ATMs from Drinkwell pop up. Water ATM is an automated teller machine, but of water. Tap a card, get clean water. Not only clean water, but also water that is filtered from any other impurities or potentially negative substances, which in some areas, like in Bangladesh where he started, is incredibly important. Because even though there were major philanthropic efforts to insert drinking wells into many communities, the water wasn't adequately tested. And in fact, millions of people were served up excessive amounts of carcinogenic materials unknowingly in their water. So Drinkwell covers that, and it does so in one of the most environmentally friendly ways. As you'll learn in the episode, some water filtration methods like reverse osmosis can actually end up wasting massive amounts of water. But with their filtration system, minimal, almost no water is wasted in the process. And in that process, communities that didn't have access to water and oftentimes don't really have the money in order to pay for clean water are in fact able to pay for their clean water. So in this episode, we're going to talk about not only their incredible business, but also how they came to be, how they saw the limits of philanthropy, how they pivoted from a first business model to then sell directly into governments and to utilities, and then tips on how to actually sell into governments and utilities, organizations that are notoriously challenged to sell and partner with, but also massive levers because of how many people they can support. We're also going to cover other things like how do you as a founder manage an organization and a board during crisis? And you're going to get really valuable tips on how to do that. In addition, we're going to talk about how he himself managed his own self and mental health, especially when things got really hard, not only with work, but also with some really sad news that hit from his personal life. And we're also going to talk about other ways in terms of how do you develop employees. One of the things that they proudly do is hire all of their employees from local communities, and that includes the senior leaders at their organization. So how they've continued to develop and invest and grow these leaders. You're also going to get some tips on finding investors, finding grants, and building a hybrid finance structure in order to scale a social enterprise. All that to say, we are going to cover a lot, and in it, you're going to hear some really incredible stories. So without further ado, I can't wait to introduce you to our next guest, Minhaj. Minhaj, welcome to the Helping Billions podcast. I am very, very excited for this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Mark. No, it's really fun to do this. I'm really excited.
Rock on. So, so we first met a few years ago virtually. Our first interaction was post-COVID virtually because in the work that I was doing at Moving Worlds, we were providing non-financial support to amazing social entrepreneurs, and we partnered with a lot of other impact investors and funding institutions. One of those was an organization that had funded Drinkwell from the early days. And I want to kind of dive into this, the early days, if you will, of Drinkwell, because you all started really out of like a research, like kind of innovation atmosphere, and you commercialized your product, which helps get clean water really, to the extent that I understand it, the end of utility lines, right? So you sell to utilities, you sell to governments, and you help get clean drinking water to people. And you're such an incredible feature for this podcast because literally billions of people around the world drink water. Not nearly enough of them have access to clean, reliable, consistent water. You solve that problem with a really innovative model and business model. And so I'd love to hear more. Talk to me more about how you saw this potential from a kind of research innovation hub to say, okay, there is potential here to commercialize this. Let's move this into a social enterprise business model.
Sure. No, so I will tell you, the lines may look smooth and linear now looking back, but it was anything but. And there was no vision for me to be an entrepreneur building a social enterprise that partners with utilities across India and Bangladesh. I very much found myself in this as an offshoot of really my love of public health and my roots in Bangladesh, which is where my parents are from. And every summer growing up, I would go to Bangladesh because my parents very much wanted me to know my roots and be able to speak Bangla and to be able to stay connected because they were, I call myself an ABCD, American born confused Desi. Because you don't know, like, you feel more Bangladeshi when you're in America, you feel more American when you're in Bangladesh. And so you don't really feel fully like you belong in any one place. That was very much my childhood. If I would go to Dhaka or go to the village, and if I couldn't speak Bangla, people would kind of look at me funny because I look like I should be able to do that, right? And then when I'm here in the U.S. and I'm, speaking on the phone very clean, very eloquently, and then people kind of meet me in person like, oh, okay, I didn't, and I grew up in Texas. I was back then, diversity was not as big of a thing in the early 90s. And so very much wanted to continue living in this duality in college, which is how I ended up studying at Hopkins. And then the joke I say is there's more Hopkins alumni in Bangladesh than Baltimore because of all the amazing public health research that professors are doing. And so that, for the first time, had me go to to Bangladesh, not to stay in air-conditioned, apartments of my extended family who were too scared of having me roaming the streets, but actually getting into the weeds of safe drinking water access, going into the rural villages, understanding why there is this horrendous track record of water deployments that are launched with the best intentions, but within 24 months they go defunct, right? Um, and so that was very much the development problem. And well, I'll be very honest. I grew up very humble beginnings, very middle class, and going to a school like Hopkins, I didn't know what consulting was. I didn't know what banking was. But it was right around '08 when I learned how there was these high-paying summer internships. And so, I interviewed, at like a bulge bracket firm. And I remember that was right when the subprime mortgage crisis happened. And so I actually wrote a thank you for the interview email to my summer intern interviewer. And then the email bounced because the company just went into thin air because, it was the height of the crisis.
Wow, what a
And I
time.
didn't have anything to do. And so because I didn't have anything to do, my dad was like, hey, there's like this, uncle who's like a chemistry professor and like he just won like this really cool prize for like clean water, in Bangladesh. Maybe you should just email him. So I cold emailed him. And in fact, it was a professor at George Mason University. And I just cold emailed him and I said, I don't have anything to do this summer. I really want to have something fun happen. And I heard you just got a prize that's $1 million. And at Hopkins, it was called the Davis Projects for Peace program. And it was amazing. They gave you $10,000 as a student in college to try to promote peace anywhere in the world.
Wow.
And back then, that's a lot of money, right? If you're like a, sophomore and you have a $10,000 grant and all you need to do is promote peace. That changed my life because with that grant, I was able to connect with this professor at George Mason who then said, okay, you can help distribute this household arsenic water filter that I just commercialized and just got this $1 million, it was called the Granger Prize. And the product was called the Sona filter. It was this 2-bucket filter. Um, and, just to back up, arsenic, you can't see it or smell it. But if it's in your water, within 3 to 5 years, you'll get cancer-causing arsenicosis. And the World Health Organization called it the largest mass poisoning in human history, what they found in Bangladesh, where unknowingly, because Bangladesh in 1971, when it became independent, received a lot of aid. And so the aid community drilled millions of tube wells all over the country, but they didn't test the groundwater that was the source of the tube wells. And it wasn't until decades later where they discovered, oh my gosh, these tube wells that we drilled, they're actually poisoning the people because of the arsenic levels. It's usually safe to have 10 parts per billion, but there was like 200, 300 parts per billion of arsenic found. And so that made all the headlines for all the wrong reasons in Bangladesh. And it's, I think, a classic case study of unintended consequences, where like in the immediate term, the tube wells really helped drive down the under 5 mortality rate, and it was deemed a success story. But then decades later, people started to consume the arsenic-contaminated water, and then arsenicosis kicked in. And so that very much started this journey for me, is seeing that there was this arsenic solution that a professor had just won a prize for. I have nothing to do this summer. How can I then? And so then I ended up luckily getting this grant. And I remember every college that had this program, Davis Project for Peace, they gave each college one award, one $10,000 award. And so I was lucky. And I remember I called my uncle in Bangladesh. I called all my family and said, can you please get me a letter from the civil surgeon saying that they'll give me permission to distribute this filter? Like, I had to work the social capital of my family. Yeah.
Good work.
And like, I remember it was me and my friend at the time, we applied for this, and we were competing against like Engineers Without Borders and, the Hopkins chapter. And like, they had like great funding, and they had, a solid team. And I remember the Center for Social Concern, which administered the grant, told me the reason why we chose you is because you had all these letters of support from the local government, from the civil surgeon, from the elected officials saying arsenicosis is ravaging our village. We would love to host Minhaj and his project to see if there's a way we can provide safe drinking water. And I would say that was the first seed where I learned that having that local partnership with the government trumps everything. I mean, everything. It doesn't matter how glossy your product could be or how shiny your brochures could be. What I have learned, and this has definitely stayed with me over time, is you need to optimize for that local government buy-in. And, governments, especially nowadays, have their flaws. But at the end of the day, they are the only change agents that can truly scale your, in our case, clean water to a level that can actually impact billions. And so that was very much the start. And, a funny story, we distributed 100 filters. I love the experience so much. 2 years after, when I graduated, I went back to Bangladesh to see how many of the filters were still working. I did a Fulbright. And so I had great like anticipation that I'm going to now scale this model. And then out of 100, only 3 were still working.
Whoa.
And the reason why only 3 worked is because there was no local supply chain to repair if a bucket tipped over. There was no availability of the replacement media that you had to put into the buckets. And so that also taught me, like, okay, you need local supply chains and you need amazing after-sale servicing. And so then what I did is my Fulbright research was all about willingness to pay for clean water. And there what I found was there was this and in fact, it was the Fulbright conference in Kochi, India. That was another formative moment where all these Fulbrighters from, it was then called the South Central Asia Bureau of the State Department, where all the Fulbrighters from South Central Asia, they come together for a research conference. And there we all met each other that were doing work on water or on labor or on, environmental rights. And so I was in the water cluster, and I met a professor, this time from Lehigh University, who had developed arsenic removal technology. But instead of doing household filters, he did community-based filters. And then what was interesting was he had entrepreneurs in West Bengal, in Calcutta, which is another arsenic affected area. Um, and they would actually sell water at a profit. Like they would sustain a business selling water. And I was very fascinated by this because that, in effect, solves all the issues I saw earlier, which was, local supply chains and having after sale servicing. Well, you need to pay to have laborers and have that kind of supply chain sustain. And so I connected with Dr. Sengupta, the professor from Lehigh. And then through his work, I found that there were female entrepreneurs who were able to convince folks who make less than $2 a day to buy something that you can get for free, water, right? And the way they would do that is they would say, Holi, the festival of colors, right? It's where you throw colors, and it's a very fun and festive time of year in India. But you have obviously stained clothes. And so what these entrepreneurs would do is they would sell water by saying, hey, this water is not only safe to drink, but if you actually laundry with it, you'll actually get whiter whites. Or, if there's like a big sangeet, like a big wedding, and if you shower with this water, you'll get smoother hair. So you'll look amazing at the wedding. Or, after, let's say, Durga Puja, like when you're hosting all your family, if you cook with this water, you'll get less briny fish and whiter rice. And they were all appealing to the aspirational lifestyle benefits, right? And that was a big departure from what I saw the more traditional actors doing, which was, very fear-based, health-based, like saying, hey, drink this water because if you don't, you might get cholera, you might get diarrhea. And I kind of think of it like, we all know we have to floss, right? But how many people actually really floss, right? I mean, I'm outing myself here, but I think, if if I knew though that if I like floss tonight and immediately I'd get amazing pearly whites, right? I'd probably be more inclined to do it
fully.
And these entrepreneurs got that. Like they understood I need to give a value proposition that's so immediate that it'll make someone buy something that they can actually get for free because this will give you immediate results. And so that was mind blowing for me. But then when I remember, again, this is part of the Fulbright year, I go back to my Fulbright research affiliates, and they're like, no, this academic research does not back this kind of messaging. Not to mention, this is like you're all you're doing is promoting materialism and you're promoting beauty, and we want to impact health outcomes. And then I was saying like, no, but it doesn't matter the means. The outcome is this kiosk has been running. At the time, it was they had started in 2012, so now it's still running today. It's 2025. It's been 13 years, and I was like, that's really interesting. That is something that needs to be scaled. But the method didn't really kind of match with the research and the known ways, right? And that's what kind of had me turn into the business side of things, right? Is kind of, at that point I realized, okay, studying public health, doing things the traditional way, fear-based marketing, health-based messaging, isn't moving the needle. But man, these entrepreneurs are on fire and like they're really, really providing safe drinking water in remote rural areas over years. How do we multiply this? And that was, I think, when, and grant you, this is like 1 year out of college. That was when I kind of started to understand, okay, maybe there's a potential like opportunity here, but I don't know how this career would pan out. There's no on-campus recruiting, right, for this. And so then actually there was on-campus recruiting for IT consulting. And so actually, and the way Fulbright is structured is they don't let you know until the month before you graduate whether you got it or not. And so, and this is another theme is, social impact, it's so just unstructured and uncertain that it's very easy to default into the structured path of like consulting, right? And so for me, I didn't know if I was going to get the Fulbright or not. So I ended up accepting an offer at a Boston, an IT firm. And when a month before graduating, I found that, wait, I got a Fulbright. They were nice enough to let me defer for a year. My Fulbright ended. I went to Boston. I worked in a very, very, I would say, boring 2-year job. I edited software user manuals for blood donation software.
Wow.
And so,
Different.
and so, yeah, I mean, at that point, I think after my first year of working in the consulting job, I was like, I don't like this. Like, I miss what I do in Bangladesh. And what was really fun about being in Boston is there's so many business plan competitions, there's so many universities, and
Yeah.
so every weekend there was Babson or Northeastern or MIT or Harvard having a social enterprise conference or a pitch competition. And so what I would do is actually on the weekends, I would stay in touch with all the folks I met in Bangladesh, stay in touch with all the folks in India. And then on the weekends, I would pitch this idea of commercializing Dr. Sengupta's, it's called ion exchange, the resin that can remove arsenic and fluoride from groundwater. And particularly what he had invented was called hybrid ion exchange, Hicks. And so what's unique about that is, let's say you have 100 liters of water, Hicks can actually remove arsenic and fluoride while preserving 99%, 99 liters of the 100 liters of water. Versus if you use like reverse osmosis and you put that through, put 100 liters of water through a reverse osmosis membrane, you'll only get like 50 to 60 liters of product water. And then 40 liters is reject, and that's toxic brine. And so he had this amazing technology, but what I was more interested in was the fact that his go-to-market was with these entrepreneurs who were selling water using very innovative marketing messages. And so that was my pitch at these business. This is back in 2013, 14. And I was pitching this, and then Echoing Green was the fellowship that allowed me to go full time on Drinkwell. And for the first 3 years, we kept hitting walls because the female entrepreneurs were not bankable. And so like it costs like $10,000 to set up a kiosk. And sure, I could get pitch competition money to set up the first 10 or 15, but not to set up 30,000, which is how much you'd need to cover a state, right, in India. And then what we realized 3 years in is we're not like a female entrepreneurship empowerment workshop company. We're not a non-bank financial company that can like fundraise on behalf of, first-time entrepreneurs. And it was actually, it was so very random, a BBC story featured us. So they came and they actually highlighted our work working in rural Bangladesh in arsenic-affected areas with this kiosk model. And that caught the attention of the utility managing directors in Bangladesh. And it was really cool because obviously BBC has massive reach. And this series, it was on BBC on like loop for like 3 months at different times.
Oh, wow.
And it was amazing. I had friends that were like at a hotel gym in like Cambodia who were like sending me photos like, oh my God, I'm seeing you right now. And
Wow.
that was incredible because what that did is that gave us eyeballs in front of the right decision makers that are in the government in our case. And so it was a utility managing director that reached out and said, I just saw this really interesting feature on your work. I would love to pilot what you're doing here in Dhaka. And that changed everything for us. So this was in 2017.
Wow.
And that's when we realized that, wait, we don't have to fundraise on behalf of utilities. They have tons of money.
Yeah.
They actually get billions of dollars from Asian Development Bank, World Bank, Islamic Development Bank, you name the multilaterals, right? And what was really cool was they have what's called concessional finance. And I'm talking these loans, they're like 30-year loans with like a 15-year grace period. And year 16 onward, it's like a 0.25%. They don't even call it an interest rate. They call it a service charge, right? Wow. And so then I realized, wait, our unit of change can't be the female entrepreneur because we can't attract that low cost of capital if that was our unit of change.
Yeah.
But if we actually work with utilities, they have access to such lower cost of capital, right? And that's what kind of really got us, and to today where we're working with every utility in Bangladesh. We're working with about 8 utilities in India. We have more than 700 deployments, and so from 2017 through 2025, so 8 years, I would say has been that journey, right? So I would say like 2022 12 to 17, that 5-year journey was when we were really trying to make sure the resin was working well, setting up a factory in India, making sure that, the kiosk was able to operate well. But it wasn't until 2017 that we then really had a scalable model, right? And you just sometimes have to survive long enough to find that route. And for us, that
Yeah.
route wasn't until 5 years after I really started to pitch before the company was incorporated, right?
I know there's like a startup quote. It's like you have to stay in the game long enough to get lucky, right? And so it's like, as much as I don't like to attribute success to luck, I think staying in the game, stacking odds in your favor, I think for you really is key. But so real quick, because I want to make sure we're kind of tracking. So in college, you had essentially like volunteered, right, with an organization. You knew the uncle, right? But you'd volunteered with them to see this water filter go to market. It was kind of done out in market in a more like traditional philanthropic minds like way. You then went back in your Fulbright, so the year after college. So you studied and you like really dove into this of like, hey, why aren't these things working? And that's where you saw this like these local micro entrepreneurs finding
Correct.
market inroads in ways that were way more localized, way more relevant, and quite frankly, way more successful than like an outside philanthropic model. And so
Yeah.
you said, okay, that's I think our path to like bring this fantastic innovation to market. So you created these kiosks. You were thinking, okay, we're going to somehow partner or sell to or somehow finance and figure out how to onboard female entrepreneurs to have their own kiosks. It was growing, but really challenging. Cost of capital was really high. Like the economics were just really challenging, but you were still demonstrating impact. And you actually got inbound from a utility, from a government. And then
Yeah.
from there,
Yeah.
you were able to commercialize that. And then based on the success of that, you were able to keep growing with like, sounds like really good capital terms because you were selling into these like governments and utilities. Am I kind of tracking this story?
Oh, yeah, you're right. And so obviously along that path, we've had to, so in the beginning, it was a lot of R&D grants. It was pure play, like here's an interesting innovation that needs to be
Mm,
commercialized. So we need grant funding to help set up a factory, to help set up the first deployment, to prototype and get it to be compliant with World Health quality standards.
hmm.
And then it was, okay, now that we've got the product, the technology readiness level, right? TRL levels.
Okay.
So we had to kind of, and what's fantastic is there's so much at the time, grant money. There was so much grant money available to fund innovations that are hard tech, right? Like resins and filtration tech,
Mm,
and especially climate, right? I know
yeah.
climate's really hot now. Back then, it wasn't so easy. And so we had to really uh, massage the message into kind of water access, women's empowerment. Whereas I think nowadays, climate tech on its own right is enough to stand up and attract
Yeah.
funding. And I think, and then once the deployments proved financially viable, that's when you start getting equity and saying, okay, now I
Mm,
want to go big. And then, you start by pitching to high net worth individuals as angel investment groups, right?
yeah.
And then you eventually graduate. And then obviously you have the fellowships, super important. Echo and Green,
Yeah.
it was very crucial for us in that um, connection to angel investors,
Yeah.
to kind of those first time, I would say, I guess nowadays they call it pre-seed, right? Like the
Hmm.
first $1 million raised. Um, and then eventually, once you raise enough equity, then you have to kind of look at, okay, am I bankable? Like, can I grow with debt? Because if
Hmm.
you can grow with debt, then you don't need to dilute yourself. And
Yep.
you can show that whoever will invest will actually not get diluted as this grows. And
Yep.
so then you start talking to debt providers and you learn about the concessionary world of infrastructure finance that you can
Mm,
access through utilities. Um, and then as you get the debt piece right, that at that point you can go for the growth round investment, where you
mm,
get the institutional investors, the private equity firms to then really take you to the next level.
Yeah.
But then as you're going to the next level, you have macro risks, right? And
Right.
then
And
so
we'll get into those. I know
yeah.
you suffered a macro risk. Let's come back to the grant before we get to the macro risk section and some of these
Yeah.
other later stage funders, because I think there's something very interesting there where you said we're going to go with the commercial model, but actually the commercial model isn't ready yet. So we're actually going to go attract some like philanthropic or grant capital, but you're doing that as a for-profit entity. And we see a lot of successful social entrepreneurs do that way, but we also see a lot of entrepreneurs not aware that that's even a possibility. Can you kind of, I know this was a while ago, but can you kind of bring us back into that mode? How did you find entities, like really in the details here, like how did you find entities willing to give grants to a for-profit entity? How did you find them? How did you convince them? Because especially if you go
Sure.
back 10 years ago, that it's still not common. Right. It's happening now, but it's still not common. It's even less common 10 years ago. Yeah. How did you do that?
Yeah, so I remember, I don't know, I don't even know if these databases are still active, but like I would scour university social enterprise club databases for competitions. So like I remember
Mm,
at the time it was Reynolds, NYU Reynolds School, they had a great database. Um, I think we really benefited from being in Boston because they had a very rich ecosystem of students, innovation. And so there was just a very palpable like energy. Every Thursday there'd be Venture Cafe in Cambridge where you just all got
mm,
together and so I really think the university ecosystem was huge. Even though I was not in school anymore,
yeah.
these universities would host these pitch competitions, right? And so that was big. And then, for example, there's lots of accelerators, many of which are still around today, right?
Yep.
They give grants to for profits. Um, and so you have to spend a lot of time applying for these things. And frankly, if it wasn't for, the people I met on Fulbright doing the actual work, right? There's
Yeah.
no way this would have happened. And I'll be honest, one of the most tragic things I think that I have learned is that because I remember when I got the Echo and Green Fellowship, I moved to Bangladesh full time. I was no longer doing this like in Boston kind of working / on the
Hmm.
weekends doing pitch. And I remember I was so excited to kind of get local entrepreneurs in Bangladesh to access these networks. But the
Mm,
issue was English. The issue was they couldn't write as kind of tightly, right?
hmm.
And I remember, I'll never forget Harish Hande, founder of Selco India. I had met him, and he always said that he wanted to create a fund that is only for people who can't use Microsoft Office. Because if you want to access capital, you have to use like Excel for your financial model. You have to use
Totally.
PowerPoint for your deck, right? And if you
Yeah.
don't know how to use Microsoft Office, you're blocked out of that
Yeah.
entire world of capital, right?
That's
And
real.
so I remember if it wasn't for me being in a city like a Boston, if it wasn't for me being very comfortable with living in Excel, living in PowerPoint, right?
Yeah.
There's no way. And if it wasn't for me having the network, right, whether it's through family or through the Fulbright, doing the actual work, um, you're kind of like a development director, right, of a
Yeah.
nonprofit. Honestly, is what you are.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if that's helpful. I think what's really amazing, obviously nowadays, is things are virtual. You have obviously like AI to help you make amazing copy and
Yeah.
tighten your content. So I think the playing field has certainly leveled. But I think what is not what really matters, and I remember my first angel investor, it was at a Boston coffee shop. He wrote the check and then he handed it over to me, but he didn't let go. I had to kind of like grab it twice. It was a it was his personal money, and he had written like it was a $50,000 check. Um, and I remember like we joked about it because I had to again like I had to do the double take to grab it. But I remember years later we were laughing about it, and he told me, Minhaj, it was your eyes. It was just like when we would meet, and your enthusiasm and the way you
You're just
made eye
in.
contact. And so you have to like really connect with people in a one-to-one way, saying like, I know I don't have a track record. I know
Yeah.
I don't have a background, but man, I am fired up about this and I
Yeah.
am going to go all in. And that takes, and one of my favorite sayings is people invest in lines and not dots. So like when you first
Mm,
meet someone, that is a dot in time at which they interacted with you. So
yeah.
it's super important. Like for example, with this our first investor, he did diligence on us for like 9 months, right? And he would make me like meet him at a coffee shop on a Saturday at like 7 a.m., right? Um, but like the thing is, like over time, those dots became a
Yeah.
linear trust of,
Yeah.
okay, I can see that you're committed and you are staying true to your word. And so I think those really matter. Obviously, like we had a lot of rejections, right? So you need to find your
Yeah.
champions. And so that's just more at bats, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In
Yeah.
fact, my first investor I met, it was on the dance floor of a startup conference the last night. I met his
Incredible.
I met his wife on the dance floor, and his wife was like, "You need to meet my husband." And
Incredible.
then, so you just got to put
You never
yourself
know.
out there. You
Yeah.
gotta, yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's interesting. You said like, with AI, there's like a leveling there, right? But I think one thing, at least from my perspective, that I want to highlight, and I think we see this in a lot of the other successful social entrepreneurs that we've got to interview on the show, and that I've got to work with and support via our work at Moving Worlds, is there's also like you've earned it, right? Even though you were younger at the time, like you did that during summer, right? Like you went with your Fulbright, you stayed connected, you were going
yes,
to these competitions, like because anybody can do a deep research to find a lot of mission line investors. Anybody can use AI to like personalize their message for everybody and send it out the door. But like you got to wake up at 6 to get to that coffee on time. You got to like take that rejection after rejection after rejection and keep going. And I think it's true not only for angels but also for more traditional like grant givers or accelerators, right? Like we see this a lot. People apply to accelerators, they don't get in, but the accelerators love it if you keep applying, right? They want to see, to your point, I love that, lines not dots. Like they want to see it again and again and again. They want to see progress even if you didn't have resources, because at some time as an entrepreneur, you're going to not have resources, right? And so you got to show that stick to itness. That's so interesting. Okay, so then let's go forward more, because the other thing that you did that is I think really in the spirit of the show too, of like, okay, we want to go from communities that serve hundreds and thousands to nations and impact billions. And so you did that by seeing this opportunity with utilities and then selling into utilities and selling into governments. Um, in like selling to consumers, not easy, but easiest. Selling to other small businesses, harder. Selling to big corporates, hard. Selling to governments, like off the chart difficult. Like what when you so your first one was inbound. So let's not talk about that one. I want to talk about numbers 2 and number 3.
yeah.
How did you find 2 and 3? How did you get in the door? How did you get them to believe when you still only really had one pilot
Yeah.
underway there?
Yeah. So the trick is to make that one first inbound your champion and the person who gets all the credit. We see in government, it's so important for the person who's actually taking the risk on you to reap the upside. And let me explain what I mean by that. They don't get a salary bonus if they take a risk by working with a startup. If anything, they're taking on a lot of reputational risk, right, by working with a startup. But what you can do is show that if this succeeds, you are happy to have them be front and center, and you are happy to have them take the spotlight, and that you are okay being behind the scenes in the back, because what that does is it gives comfort to other utility folks, other government stakeholders saying, okay, these guys seem like safe. They're not going to try and overshadow me. They're not going to try and kind of, monopolize or potentially hijack, something. I can kind of trust that these guys, because at the end of the day, as a startup, yes, you are innovative. Yes, you are very out of the box, but governments are the polar opposite of that, right? And they can't really, they are not set up to really dance. They're elephants, right? And so they can't even move that quickly. And so you really need to work at their pace. You need to have them kind of take the spotlight. And what I have learned, and this is many of our funders have said what they love about our model is that we have a direct contract with the utility, right? And so it's not like we're, layers removed, degrees removed. And the other thing is we're happy to kind of white label and kind of co-brand and be very much behind the scenes. I kind of, when I was first starting to pitch this in the social enterprise conference circuit, I always told them we want to be like Intel. Intel powers Apple and they power like Microsoft and they power all kinds of devices. So Drinkwell would love to power water kiosks, piped water systems, domestic water filters. And like Intel doesn't have a massive name brand on every device. It's like a little sticker in the corner of like when you open the lid of the laptop, right next, below the keyboard. And so that was very much our MO. Was we don't want to be the big splashy name front and center. We're happy to be in the little corner saying powered by Drinkwell. And so I think so. First of all, yeah, you have to really get your first inbound to reap the rewards and have them. So in the government's case, you really want them to look good at international conferences, at trade shows, sectors, give them awards like most innovative water project, right? Or have them kind of really win like an award from, let's say, the United Nations during UNGA week, or from, what's the best is if a head of state is visiting DC, right? And then there's a organization or a chamber of commerce event that it confers on them an award because of a project that, you did with the, right? And so you have to really pull those levers. And, and this is getting a lot more now into like government sales. But what I have found, and this is not even true in the case of government, even the tycoon business folks that are really well known in countries, in emerging countries, it's really hard to get an appointment when you're in their home turf. But then it's really easy to kind of get some FaceTime with them when they're attending a conference, especially abroad, right? And so it was really, really important that when I saw a target minister or a target kind of mayor or a decision maker, and when I saw that they were going to some conference, right, that I find myself somehow at a side event or somehow there, right, just to kind of get that like 20 seconds with them and hopefully 5 minutes with their, chief of staff or their, their staff, so that I could say, hey, here's not just my card, but like, here's like, ATM card. I'm going to follow up with you in country in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks. So many of our funders, they would support knowledge sharing workshops where we would have the government partner come to a conference to speak, right? Like those are so important. So that's how you have the government folks sulk in the limelight, right? And you win, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the government is fickle and people
Yep.
change, right? And so if you can build that institutional kind of, track record with, the agency that outlasts the person,
Yeah.
that, hey, like we have this relationship, it spanned multiple administrations, and these are the different accolades that we've been able to garner your agency. Those things, I think, go a long way.
Really help.
But
Yeah.
but let me say one more very important thing. There's no chance we would have worked with number 2, 3, or 4 if it wasn't for our channel partners. So in our case, it was like, so the World Bank, Asian Development Bank fund these utilities, right? And so we were really lucky because we worked with an accelerator called Imagine H2O. And what they do is they focus on connecting the water innovators to these utility folks via these multilateral development banks, right? That was our big kind of moment. And so, and these connection matchmaking events would happen, it could happen at Stockholm World Water Week. During COVID, it would happen over Zoom. And what would happen is, and these are very disparate worlds, because the world of development banks is billions, right? They actually think in
Massive.
billions, in
Yeah.
hundreds of millions. But then the world of social entrepreneurs, we don't even have Excel models that go to billions, right?
Right.
And so,
Well, billions of dollars, billions of people, we do. Yeah.
yeah, right, billions of dollars. But see, these guys are at billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And then I remember you're just like, whoa, you're at a scale that I can't fathom. And I remember, one of the first meetings I had with someone from the World Bank's global water practice, and he was just looking at me and he was just like, I need you to think in billions. Like, I can't work with anything that you've given here because it doesn't even meet the minimum standard for me to even have like a concept note written. okay, cool story. You're at like, at the time we were only at 80 deployments, right? And they're like, can you at least get to like 500, right? Uh, if not thousands. And fast forward, this was in 2018. Here we are now in 2025, and I'm at 700. I haven't even hit the thousands yet, right? And so that just gives you a sense of the scale differential at which those guys can pick you up versus where you start when you're at the business pitch plan competitions operating at 8 deployments, 10 deployments, right? And then how you bridge that, how you go from, even right now for us to go from like 700 to like thousands, is obviously a very different capital stack and a very different organizational kind of approach.
It seems like you really spent some time understanding like who they were, where they were going, what would interest them, and leveraging your earliest customers, right? And using them to help get in the door. And as you were talking about that, it actually it sounded very similar to business sales, right? It's like you hero
Sure.
you hero your customer, you don't hero yourself, right? You find
Yeah.
them where they're going to be, where they're actually looking for new ideas and open to it. But I think you also had some really smart let's call them like follow-up tactics, right? You had proof that I'm going to be in country, right? You were getting to like, okay, this is first conversation, when is next meeting? It seems like you were quite like, you're in the same way that you were looking for customers and then for funders, and the same way that you applied for Fulbright. It looks like you're always looking for these opportunities. You're researching, you're positioning your ask, and it just seems like you're tracking, you are following up on whoever the lead is, whatever it is, to then kind of get in the door. And I think another piece that I want to highlight, right, is that you're heroing the people that you're working with, or the organizations or the utilities that you're working with, right? You're not hearing yourself, you're not hearing the product, right? You're bringing that so they can then see themselves in that solution. So especially in a more risk averse buyer, i.e. a government, right? You've got this more risk averse solution and some valuable case studies to go forward here. So you're growing, right? The organization is growing. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about, okay, you're growing this. So at some point, you're also now really needing to build a very competent team. And how did you think about, as this is growing, your most strategic first or second, like more senior level hire? Who did you decide on? How did you decide on them? And then how did you bring them in, get them kind of up to speed in motions, especially on like a more and different business model, especially in this sector?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that we haven't always gotten it right, and it's always a journey. And so for us, what was really helpful in the early days is my co-founder Mike, who his PhD advisor was Dr. Sengupta from Lehigh, who invented the Higgs nano resins. So it was very clear what our lanes were in terms of running the business. Mike was the PhD product guy. He was the technical guy. He would kind of really make sure that on any calls with customers, with investors, with regulators, that it was clear that he would answer all the questions about product safety, about removal ability, about, technical capacity. And then it was very clear from my side that I was the business person and the development person. And so my job was to really have the deck very cleanly, concisely telling a narrative, and that the numbers all checked out, and that we had really nice pipeline. And so that division of labor, I think, really helped us kind of not have any overlap, in terms of, just, hey, I actually disagree. I think we should do it this way. There was no scope for that because our kind of job descriptions were so different. Um, and I remember my favorite time was when we were thinking about titles, right? And Mike was like, I just want to be GSD. And I was like, what is G? He's like, get shit done. But like, you can just say general supervisor of development. And like, that's the like very, I am an execution machine kind of mindset that Mike had, which is, I don't care about a fancy CXO title. Just call me general supervisor of development, because you and I both know what that really means. I just get shit done.
I
And
love it.
so I think, that was incredibly, incredibly helpful in terms of creating a culture of absolute focus on execution, of technical competency being the most important thing. Because I think, I am non-technical, right? I am not an engineer. And so I had to learn about the world of water filtration, about the different technology types, about recovery, about operating costs versus capital costs. And so, but what was really helpful with Mike is, and he was very steeped in the metrics and in the world. But I, as an outsider, kind of saw his professional training as overwhelming and too complicated. And so what that did is it allowed me to kind of create a layman's version of what he had envisioned. And then I'm really happy to say that Drinkwell today has all local hires. Literally, I am the only hire. We have over 700 employees, and I am the only one that is a U.S. born, outsider, if you will. Everyone else is literally born in Bangladesh, born in India. And
That's
so,
amazing.
and this is where I'm going to say, it took time, because naturally what that means is you have to train people, because a lot of the way universities work in Asia is very different from getting a $10,000 grant to change the world for a summer in the US. Those kinds of opportunities are not at all the norm. And I would say, in Bangladesh and India, it's route memorization. And it's a lot of you're just moving through chapter books and textbooks and quizzes, and you're not really thinking critically. And so I had to lean a lot on my board. I would say I have a very operating board, and I'm very lucky for that. These are entrepreneurs, angel investors who have built businesses who now want to give back. And they very much have helped me, like literally during COVID, doing weekly Zoom sessions with our team in Dhaka and teach them how you do forecast actual targets, cohort analysis, 5 whys. And so it was really getting your investors, getting your funders to kind of handhold amazing, amazing local staff who really have the capability and the capacity, but they just haven't had the exposure, right? And so, we're really happy. Like in both countries, the people that we started the company with back in 2015, back in 2016, they're all still here with us, and we're still working together. And so, we haven't really made the, CXO hire from, the colonial West. Or, what we have done is we've leaned a lot on our board, on funders who have seconded people. So, this is now getting a bit into, corporate kind of venture capital or institutional investment funds and the value add they bring. What they give, in our case, it was Danone Community. So Danone, they can actually second people, people who are working in financial planning and analysis, right? And they'll spend, 2 weeks on ground mentoring, training, and so we've benefited a lot from, and post COVID, it's really helped because before it was only in person, right? But now the fact that we've normalized virtual, I know now I'm probably getting into, a lot of what you're incredible at, but we have very much built a team by grooming the local talent. And you could argue that maybe that took us a bit longer in terms of really developing the capability of our team. But what's beautiful about this is I don't have any risks of, staff returning because the country of Bangladesh has a macro risk, and,
Yeah.
they're feeling unsafe and they have, other better options, for lack of a better term. This is what's beautiful about localization, right? Is the people there, they're resilient and they're committed. And but
Yeah.
obviously you need that kind of mentorship and
Yeah.
guidance, without
I'm,
which, yeah.
yeah, it's so interesting to hear, and I want to double click on two areas of this because I think it's incredible. You're like, okay, let's hire local, let's develop local. And when you kind of started sharing this, one of the first things that you mentioned is you turned a lot to your board. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of entrepreneurs are actually reluctant to talk to their board about some of these things, right? Because they're like, well, I should know how to do all this. Like, can you give us any like what worked really well for you in terms of saying, like, still kind of being vulnerable, like, hey, like, I need your help on this thing, and like pulling them in, but still keeping the sort of say the power dynamics at play here, knowing like, hey, if they learn these things on the inside, that might affect if they do a follow-on round or how they, support me as CEO. Yeah, what worked really well with you in terms of board management?
So here's the thing. So we have a board that's comprised of angel investors who put personal money in. We have institutional folks, and those people rotate. Uh, and I would say when I visit San Francisco, I am actually staying at the home of my board member. When I'm visiting in Mumbai, like I am hanging out with the family, and I'm, like this is a deep relationship. This isn't just, oh, you're on my board. This isn't just, oh, okay, you like wrote me a check and, I'll do my best. It's a very intimate and close journey that you both go on because the mission is so powerful, right? And I'll never forget, kind of, and I always remind myself of this, which is I'm so lucky because it's not Drinkwell isn't amazing because I'm running it. It's amazing because the mission is so beautiful and the mission is so powerful. And that mission is what has board members giving up discretional personal time and really trying. And so what I have found is that intimate closeness where you're literally, almost like family, right? To that person. Because, during COVID, like my dad passed away, and this board member would help meditate with me over Zoom and would like step in with me to help take over management review meetings because I was grieving and I was trying to take care of family affairs. And so when you have that level of a relationship, um, obviously, it's a very deep bond. And so that's not normal, right? But I would say that is what has really helped me have that kind of a warmth to the board, to certain board members. Now, I'm not going to say at the same time, institutional investors, I also have an amazing relationship with, and I'm able to meet up with them at conferences. It's a little different though, right? There, it's not like, actually, one of our investors had a rule where like you have to come and stay with my family and cohabitate for a night, just a night, and then we'll go and we'll do what's called Taco Tuesday. We'll walk across the border from El Paso, just so you know where I am in my life in terms of entrusting some of my capital to you, right? And so I think what's really important for early stage entrepreneurs is to find those kinds of angel investors, right? Who are really going to write that check out of their own account and who are really able to give that time from their own discretionary, right? And so how do you do that? For me, these are folks who are diaspora. These are people who have a background, who are originally from India, right? And so, yeah. And so once you have that, what that does is when you eventually have institutional investors come on the board, they see the culture and they see the vulnerability and they see the openness, and then they can't help but participate, and right. And
Yeah,
so and even though it's probably a limited term that institutional investors board nominee will be on the board maybe for 2, 3, 4 years, right? um but yeah, it's coachability, right?
yeah,
And so yeah, so I guess to try and kind of encompass this into a tight saying, I would say like, you can't really divorce your board member, right? You can't really like end, right? And so that first investor, that first board member is everything in terms of getting the dynamic right, in terms of, and so
yeah.
and I'm glad that we did a 9 month diligence because it would have, if we would have rushed into it, it would have ended very poorly, right? And so yeah.
Yeah. One, and it seems like so much trust building there too. And and in reflection, it's so interesting. You say like our first, customer, our first utility provider, our first, it just, the amount that you invest in your first, right? It's just to build that trust, make sure you're getting feedback. But I think the other thing you said that's really, really smart is, a lot of social entrepreneurs in general, will say, okay, I need to figure out board governance. I need to figure out board power, board seats, like board functions, all those things. And those are all important. But I love talking about board culture here, right? And I think the thing that social entrepreneurs have going for them is that you can ground the mission
Mm-hmm.
alongside the profit story, and
Mm-hmm.
using that both to suss out, okay, who is going to be an investor here, right? And then also who's going to have a voting seat here, and who am I going to pull into these different conversations? So yeah, I think that's a really, really cool sound bit that I haven't heard much. So I think kudos to you for building like board culture. And I also think, layering in my own opinion here, and I hope that's okay, is there is a element of hard work, relationship building, but also vulnerability that I think you're sharing, right? And I really want to say thank you for sharing what you did, and of course, so sorry to hear about your dad's passing, and during such a chaotic time anyway. And I think for you to go through that and to engage like a board member here, to be in tune with yourself enough to say, hey, this is something that I need, and like I would imagine that was like asking for help, and there's probably all kinds of other emotions that go with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I think that's a really it just speaks a lot to the type of probably like leader that you are, and I think the role modeling that you're set. So yeah, I want to say thank you for sharing that, and I think the wisdom around board culture is really astute.
No, thank you. I think being vulnerable is so underrated in this. I know, you have to obviously have your numbers together. You have to have your facts straight. You have to have your story crisp, right? But that humane connection, that one to one, I think, irrespective of whether it's pitching to a government, pitching to a multi-lateral development bank, practice head, or an angel, like making eye contact, slowing down, like relationships, I have learned over time, irrespective of the setting, it's those one-to-one relationships that really get you through. Yeah.
Yeah. And amazing what a one-to-one relationship can do to then build a company that will scale
Yeah.
and reach billions, right? Yeah, it's still fundamental. Um, uh, there are so many different pathways that we can go down with you. The one that I really want to make sure that we hit on, this is coming. We talked about it earlier. The macroeconomic things are growing. You're getting up to hundreds of employees, and something goes down in Bangladesh, and all of a sudden, devices, funding, offline. What happened? Most importantly, I'd love to get to the inner workings, right? Of like what and how did you move through that crisis?
Yes. So it was this time last year, so July 2024, that there was student protests happening, and things really escalated very quickly around the end of July, and then August 5th is when the government fell and the then prime minister fled the country. And it was in July when we actually, amidst the unrest, as an essential service, like during COVID, people need water, right? We can't just turn off. So we had an employee get hit with the rubber bullet actually in his cheek. Thankfully, wasn't anything serious, but it just shows kind of how, yes, we're a social enterprise, but in this context, like, we are a utility. We are the de facto utility providing safe water through water ATMs in areas where the utility doesn't have piped water. And so there is a pride that my team has in saying that, no, I am going to work amidst all of this chaos because I know dependent on me is the fact that more than 2 million people in Dhaka are every day going to benefit from this water.
Wow.
And so I will take it on me to kind of put my life at risk. And that's what they did during COVID before the vaccines came out. And my team, they're like, the average age is 23. We're like 35% female out of 700 plus. And so like what's really awesome is this is a youth driven effort, right? We're not like a bunch of old, I mean, I don't, yeah, that came out wrong. We're not like a bunch of,
Yeah.
haggard. Yeah. Yeah. I think what I love about our, Bangladesh is a very youthful country, and the students that took it on themselves to do something about a government that was at the time at year 15, right? Um, requires a lot of bravery and resilience. That same spirit I see in the fact that, we have our amazing frontline team who continue to work. And the issue wasn't so much of the dedication, because everyone knew that we have to provide safe water to the people of Dhaka. It was when the internet got cut out and we couldn't deliver on that mandate of providing water, because, you know, during the real kind of, tailwinds of digitization, IoT, we really went all in and had built a tech stack that was actually a little too reliant on internet, because we had sensors and we had every liter being traced to a customer so that we could report on the impact. And we had cameras so you could see the household demographics and you could see the gender split and the age split. And we went all in on having an amazing tech stack that was super, super granular in the insight and analytics that it could give us. And we lost sight that, wait, what happens if the internet gets cut? And then we had, the 4G backup of the mobile SIM, and that was our kind of redundancy. But then at the time, the government shut off mobile connectivity as well. And that was a reality that we had not prepared for. And so then there were actually riots and there were actually protests because people wanted water. But then we couldn't, our systems didn't work because there was no way for the ATM, when you tap the card, it needs to access your bank balance to be able to then deduct pay as you go how much water you're entitled to. And so then, we had to make a call. Okay, we're just gonna, and we had an emergency board meeting where we agreed that for the sake of the country and for the welfare of everyone, we'll just give people water for free. And like, that is just our way of saying thank you to to our customers who have been so crucial to our journey since 2017, that the least we can do after 7 years of service is kind of help but what was really tough was the fact that all the internet and all the WhatsApp, instant messaging, SMS, text messaging, that entire infrastructure was turned off, right? And so that was very difficult. Luckily, it passed after a few days, and then August 5th is when the government was overthrown. And then it was, in fact, it may be like a few days later that Professor Muhammad Yunus was selected by the students to be the chief advisor, which is the de facto interim prime minister. And I remember obviously being very relieved because he's a social entrepreneur.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, kind of the OG. Yeah, one of the OGs of it.
Yeah, and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And in fact, Professor Yunus, I had met him for the first time at a conference in India. And his family and my family, we're from the same part of Bangladesh called Chittagong. And we have a very unique dialect that's very different, to put it politically correct. I mean, it's a very like, how do I say this? Like the very rough and sloppy kind of way of talking,
Okay.
but it's very unique. And so through that kind of, interaction, and actually he was on the chair of Danone Communities, which was our equity investor. And so, in fact, the year before, we had hosted him for a conference in Dhaka where we hosted water entrepreneurs. And so immediately I was relieved, because then I thought to myself, okay, because my fear was, oh my God, what if the army takes over? And if you have an army taking over a country, I don't imagine they're so open to a social enterprise partnering with a utility, right? And so I was relieved. And I think that was a big sigh of relief for not just me, but for many in not just, in Bangladesh, but I would say globally.
Yeah.
Professor Yunus is obviously the most legendary, famous Bangladeshi, in the history of the world. And so what he did was bring stability and bring structure and bring the comfort for a lot of aid providers to then say, okay, I trust Professor Yunus. And so Danone said, okay, we will bridge you. And then at the time, this was pre-USAID, because USAID obviously went away in Feb, I think Jan-Feb, this year, right? We're still in last year, mid last year. And so, obviously the US government I remember Professor Yunus came to Unga in New York. That was his first state or his first visit out of the country, and he had amazing week where he received so much support from the president of the United States to multiple heads of state to everyone in between from multilaterals, and so that helped stabilize. I remember because then we were, oh my gosh, what is going to happen to our utility contracts? All of the utility officials are now no longer at the helm. Um, and so there was a lot of fear and uncertainty. Um, and even though we had Professor Yunus at the top, I imagine his ability to influence, a social enterprises contract with a utility is not on his dance card, right? Or on his priority list, right? And so, then you have to be like, okay, macro wise, I'm good. But from a just day to day wise, what is happening? There is so much uncertainty. And even now, there's a lot of interim staff and bureaucrats that don't really have the mandate nor the comfort to sign multi-year agreements because at this point there's an election that's supposed to happen in February 2026. Um, and so then the issue is, how do you operate in this type of uncertainty where you don't have proper visibility into who the next political party will be and what that will mean for the story of the country's next chapter. And so now what that means is we have to kind of really lean on our India business. As the India business has generated profit after tax the last 5 fiscal years. The government of India has a $44 billion Jal Jeevan mission, which is trying to give piped water to every Indian by 2028. And it's historically the largest government investment program for piped drinking water. And so, in fact, one of our licensees is going public in the India stock market. And they're going to deliver an exit, hopefully later this year, to their equity investors, which is very rare in the water sector. Um, and so we then, when we realized that, we said, okay, here's the story, here's the narrative. We have to continue operating in India at a profitable rate that shows that the profits of India can offset any losses that Bangladesh will have while Bangladesh figures itself out amidst this political turmoil. And that has been our narrative to date. And so when USAID terminated our grant earlier this year, other foundations stepped in. And when their question was, how do we know this isn't just a Band-Aid? And how do we know that Bangladesh, if it goes to like an army, a martial law situation, that everything will be for naught? And then we explained, well, no, actually, the way we've set it up is we have our profits from India that will always be able to offset the operating losses in Bangladesh. And that's how we've had to kind of now structure the business. Is
Yeah.
Bangladesh right now is not actually a country that a lot of investment committees are eager to invest equity capital into, right? And so, but the country still obviously is one of the most climate impacted countries in the world, and naturally it doesn't change any of the fundamentals of the country. And so what we're doing now is we're saying, okay, I guess we have to then go with philanthropic, that's concessionary loans, really, and grants to help bide us over with this innovative public-private partnership model. And then hopefully, once things work out, once the equity investment is ready, we can do that. But until then, we'll have the India business continue to kind of generate the profits as the cash cow. And so I think what that really shows is, you need to diversify. We've been around for, according to the government of India, a startup is only that for 10 years. And so we incorporated in India in 2015. So it was early, I think it was in February, we got the notification from the government saying, you are no longer officially a startup.
No longer,
And so,
no longer.
Yeah. And so I think for us, then we realized, okay, you know what? At least in 10 years, we have been able to set up an operation that can withstand the national macro risk of one market because of the profits generated by by another market.
And can I ask, like, operationally, I mean, I'm assuming there's a lot of time in financials here and planning and scenario planning, but like operationally, when this happened in Bangladesh, and then as you've been continuing through it, like just from like an internal work streams perspective, right? Have you set up
Yeah.
like an additional working group that meets on this in X cadence? Is it now like, are there bonus board meetings? Or have you like really integrated it all now? Like, yeah, very like in the weeds here, like operationally, how have you
Yeah,
just
yeah,
kept
yeah.
this front and center?
No, so actually, August 5th, when the government fell, I immediately made a WhatsApp group of our board members. Um, and I just told them, this just happened. The prime minister has fled. I don't know what's happening besides the fact that we are in a situation where all of our government partners are either in hiding or they are not going to show up. But we obviously have to continue to provide safe water. Um, and then frankly, even in December, as early as December, I remember I was with a few board members in Mumbai, and we were going to have like a long-term discussion about our India strategy. But then all of a sudden, we got notice from a utility, one of our utility partners in Bangladesh, saying, and this utility had gone through multiple interim managing directors in a span of months, right? And they were just saying, um, we may cancel your contract next week.
Whoa,
Imagine just getting that, right? And
you're right.
and then right, and so then all of a sudden mobilize, right? Red
Yeah.
alert, red alert. So, that night having a Zoom call and then figuring out, okay, who do we activate? Who do we write to? And then the next week when we realize, wait, okay, we think the contract is safe, but we're not going to get paid, right? Okay, how do we make payroll? Okay, and then having, a board member say, okay, I'll give you a cash advance. I'll wire it to you like tomorrow, so that you can make sure that your employees are taken care of and that
Mm,
they're not suffering, because that's not fair, right? And so it is nonstop. It is full throated, just on top of it 24/7. And I think the biggest challenge in working in, like, I would say basic necessities like utilities, like energy, water, is that you don't get a break, right? And so
mm,
it doesn't matter if it's Christmas, it doesn't matter if it's the summer holidays, like people need to get water, people need electricity, right?
yeah.
And so you're always on, right? And in terms of so I think the good thing is people who voluntarily work for a company that's in water or energy, they sign up for this, right?
Yeah.
Because like it's just part of the job.
Yeah.
Um and so yeah,
Can you
yeah. Sorry,
Well,
go
I was
ahead.
going to say, so and sorry to interrupt, but like I want to maybe stay on the people element because I think
Yeah.
the board engagement aspect that you hit on is like super important, right? So it seems like, in order to make it through any crisis, macroeconomic, COVID, right, global pandemic, any crisis, having just consistent and very like real trusting relationships with board members, super important. We kind of talked about that earlier in the show, so I'd love that you highlighted that piece again. But you mentioned employees, so what about on the employee side? Like, because I'm sure there's so
Yeah.
much ambiguity and fear for them. How did you keep them informed? What like ongoing efforts have you done to keep them like having faith and
Sure,
showing
sure,
up and
sure.
delivering work? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, okay, so first things first. The employees need to know that they're a part of an organization that will keep them safe, that will have their back, that will have them not be in a potential situation where they're kind of, not getting their salary or not really being, prioritized. And so that's the really, I think, important job of the CEO is in these moments of crisis. Kind of obviously you have to, create those spaces. I would say for us, a great thing that we did during COVID is we turned video off during our virtual meetings. And what that did is it kind of reduced the pressure of like needing to, uh, be presentable in a certain way or have that assumption. And one thing I didn't even realize until some of our female employees told me is like when masks were no longer mandated, they had to go back to wearing makeup, right? And they like had gotten really comfortable with just rolling out of bed like any guy. And I would have never thought about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then what they told me was the fact that, and we have, teams across multiple cities in both India and Bangladesh, right? And so our culture is one of virtual, meetings, but with video off, where it's just you're talking with voice. And so I think that first goes a long way in just creating a culture where you can just call anyone and talk and be vulnerable. there's something to be said because I remember during COVID, I forget the chat app that kind of took off, um, and it was a voice-based app, but like we really rode that kind of theme, and we still stick to it today, which is video optional. Let's really get to the point and let's be vulnerable with each other by talking things through.
Yeah.
And then, for example, like we are very much a family in the sense that, when certain people are stuck, like you can stay with my family, like for the night or for the week. Right. And so it's that familial culture. Right. And I think that all happens with my team because we've all kind of worked together since the beginning. And like we've had people, like we haven't ever had a situation where we've had new employees outnumber the old guard. Right. Sometimes that might happen in an
Wow.
organization where you go on a hiring spree and then all of a sudden you have more new guard folks that outnumber the old guard and then the culture's kind of changing.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, and I'm just realizing this now as I'm talking to you, because we had the founding employee culture from day one dominate the room,
Yeah.
we were never at risk, I think, of losing that kind of culture. Now, I will say there are downsides to that kind of family culture, right? Accepting mediocre performance, being perhaps a bit too forgiving when certain governance issues are made. And so then, you have to obviously play the right balance on that and you have to install proper measures. But yeah, I would say like I mean, video off was really helpful,
Hmm.
which I would have never thought as a culture. But
Yeah.
like my team keeps telling me that, the fact that we can just all get into a call at any time, and just talk things through. That was one thing. I think, and first for this WhatsApp, like I honestly run the business on WhatsApp, if I'm being very honest with you.
I think a
And
lot
I
do.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, and so we have WhatsApp groups, and people are, but I would say it's the voice chat, the voice connection,
Hmm.
um, and I think the fact that they know that when things get really hard, that there is a very supportive board and CEO that's gonna have their back.
Yeah.
Um,
I, thi-
yeah.
I think that's really interesting and yeah, connecting lines from other successful stories that we hear, right? Is like when employees trust CEO, when they trust board. And I think in order for them to do that, they have to have visibility then into some of those conversations and have good reports from it and understand what is happening and see that the CEO, the leadership, and the board continue to show up on the employee's behalf. So the fact that you have board
And you have
members
to
that have
act
helped
fast.
bridge,
Yeah.
yeah,
And you have to be super fast. You
yeah,
can't be like, oh, the board will get back to you in a week. Like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think when employees see that, oh my gosh, when we're in crisis, this board can actually align itself, make a decision within 12 hours.
yeah.
I mean, that does wonders for morale.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. It's one thing that I haven't actually seen any great guidance in terms of like when you create disaster response. Well, plans. As a CEO, right? Like if you're one person, it's too early. If you're 500 people, it's too late. Somewhere in the middle, right? But I think precluding all of that is trust, right? Is the fact that you keep showing up for employees and they know that their work is important and critical and that you continue to do the right thing for customers, right? And then when you do those things, then when you do hit moments of crisis, there's built-in trust that you have from your customers, from your employees, and that then helps you move more quickly and adapt more quickly during the process. So it's fascinating to kind of hear your story here. I I think I said this earlier. We could just like keep going for so long. At some point, people are gonna stop listening to us. So there will be a V2. But what I want to do, if you have a few moments, is jump to what I call like our lightning impact round. So I got to ask you a few just like more like rapid fire style response questions to kind of wrap up our conversation here. So first one. What's a mistake that you've made that you really hope future entrepreneurs will not make?
don't hire based on the resume, hire based on the personality. And if it takes time to ferret that out, take the time.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Um, Tell me about your biggest challenges in fundraising, and what is one thing that you wish all impact investors would know?
Oof. Um, So I think the biggest challenge in fundraising is just really having a story that covers all the bases, because sometimes you can have a story that maybe leaves a certain detail out that you uncover later on, and then all of a sudden the prospective investor is a bit confused, right? And so I think it's super important to like role play the narrative, because you can only make that first impression the first time, right? And so how you frame the business, the market, that first elevator pitch is super important. Um, and so I think the biggest challenge is, as we have evolved through the different macro risks, is having to keep revisiting that. And I've had to change that. And so
Mm,
constantly adapting. I have been very lucky to have understanding impact investors who have been very patient and who have rescheduled a lot of, debt payments because of macro risk, currency depreciation. And so I frankly, luckily, knock on wood, have not had any bitter experiences with impact investors. So I don't think there's anything I wish they would know, because frankly, every impact investor that I have worked with has been so understanding and empathetic. And so I'm going to really have to dig deep and fish hard. I will say, those impact investors who I think sometimes come off a bit too legally kind of trying to protect themselves
mm,
doesn't necessarily rub the right way to the
mm-hmm.
entrepreneur. And it's obvious, right? It's, hey, we're doing like, a portfolio review, and like I'm reaching out because, I just kind of have to because of, versus saying like, hey, like this is really, really interesting and I want to connect you. And that being the cadence, as opposed to being the cadence of just, reporting it, right? And so
Yeah.
I think impact investors should just have a cadence above and beyond reporting, if possible, with all their investees.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I love that. And I think I know this is kind of lightning round, but I think there's just a great point there. I think part of the reason that you've and I want to kind of share a compliment here, but I think is also a lesson. I think the reason that you've been able to probably have a lot of like really good positive relationships with investors, right? Because one way of reading into your answer is, oh, I want all impact investors to be flexible with repayments when things go really,
Yeah,
really, really, really bad, right? But I think in order for them to do that, the fact that you had built that trust, have been vulnerable with them, right, and they see the long-term commitment to the organization, I would imagine is
bad
is
news
a is
first.
a, is a lesson. Yeah, bad news first. Cool, quotable. We'll take it.
Yeah.
All right. What is the one leadership or manager skill that you don't necessarily have, but you wish you could turn on more, that you think would make you a more effective team leader?
I mean, there's so many things that I'm horrible at.
I'm,
Um,
I'm so
but
with
I
you.
would, um, but I really wish I was a better kind of coach on really not just delegating, but just kind of letting, not necessarily prescribing, and letting them, here's the tool. Now it's up to you to figure out how to get to the end game. Too often I find myself just, hey, I use Notion for this. And yeah, just upload the files this way, and this is the database view, and just do it, right? And it's just easy for me to, okay, checkbox. Okay, now next call,
Yep.
right? And sometimes I wish I just paused and I
Mm,
just said, hey, look, this is what we want to do. Let's check in on a one on one on how you think it should be done and grow that muscle, right? I really wish I did a better job of giving that freedom to my team more, instead of just being a prescriber.
yeah, love
Yeah.
it. When you unlock that, let me know. I need I need that manual too. Cool. What is a quote, ritual, or activity that you turn to for strength when things are super hard?
I have to close my eyes and remember everything I'm grateful for. And
Mm,
I learned that from my board member when we were doing the meditations during COVID.
um,
Um, just unplug, deep breaths, and remember all of the people who love you, who are there to support you, who are there in your darkest hours. And just know that they're still there for you. They might not be proximate at that moment, and they might not be top of mind. But if you close your eyes and for a second, just think, the filter that I like to use is, will this matter in 5 years?
hmm,
Whatever I'm going through right now, right? And if more often than not, the answer is no. That's a good way to, okay, yeah, this is
Yeah.
really bad what just happened, but 5 years after the fact, will I remember this horrible moment? If not, then okay, maybe I can take it a little easy. So yeah, I try to kind of add that perspective, because I would say that was my biggest issue in my first 5 years, is I thought everything was a fire, everything was
Oh,
important, and like I put my time on the wrong things. So
actually, that's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. I remember a lot of sleepless nights, and in the earlier days of moving worlds, and this was just a couple like. Was it? It was. I think it was kind of like a reflection at the end of last year. So this was what, 7 months ago, and I like tried to think about all the things that I had lost sleep over, and I'd come up with like two. And I was like, I lost sleep so many times, and I can only remember two things. Yeah, so especially in the
yeah,
early days, it's so
exactly,
real, so
exactly.
real. Cool. Who is another entrepreneur that's like further along on the journey than you are, that you just like you admire or you follow on LinkedIn, or you're like, someday I want to be that person when they grow up, and they can be an entrepreneur, they can be a public figure, fill in the blank.
Shivani Soroya, fellow Echo and Green fellow, running Tala. I don't know if you've ever
Tala, yeah,
had a.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, what an incredible story. And we have similar funders, from Echo and Green to a few other angels, and yeah, I mean, it's incredible. And talking about, I know we spent a lot of time about board, and like I think she has a lot of amazing experiences on just how do you position your company for incredible growth. I mean, yeah. So Shivani definitely is at the top of my list.
Cool. And then beyond Shivani, who else should we interview for the show?
Hmm. Let's see. Have you do you know Gaia from Earth-Enable?
I don't think I do.
So she just won the Skoll Award. She is an Echo and Green Fellow, my year 2014. And yeah, she does amazing work. Initially started with earth and flooring in Rwanda, but has
Huh.
now basically scaled it to where she's now doing like housing financing. So like end to end,
Wild.
right? Guy's an incredible. I mean, she's a rock star, and so she's top of mind because we just applied to do a panel on like fundraising 101 at the Echo and Green conference next
Oh,
year.
very cool.
Um,
Okay.
so yeah, Gaia. I mean, I don't know how connected you are with Echo and Green, but I mean, it's Shivani's
Sure.
obviously an EG fellow. Like, I mean,
Pick one
an
of the fellows from
embarrassment
there,
of
right?
riches. Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's such a great
Um,
network. Minaj, I want to say thank you for the time. I want to say thank you for diving into just so many details here. More so, I just want to say thank you for the incredible work that you're doing. I think when I first heard about your work, when we had the chance to interact through the work I do at Moving Worlds, and at so far only one conference in between. I'm
yeah.
optimistic there will be more. It's been so cool, and along the entire way, I love how open you've been to feedback. I love how much feedback you have given and shared with others, and most importantly, just the work that you're doing and the aspirations to literally help billions of people, I think is incredible. So we're wishing you all the greatest luck on your journey. As you close off here, where can we follow you? Where can listeners support you?
Sure. So, I'm on LinkedIn. Basically, drinkwell.com is our company website. And so those are the main, I'm trying to be a bit better now, posting on LinkedIn. And so I would say that's probably the best way to stay in touch.
All right. Awesome. Minaj, thank you so much for your time and all your work and your inspiration and insights here. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
This was so much fun, Mark. Thanks so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.